Are you struggling with roadblocks as a woman in the challenging and constantly changing world of corporate America? If you feel stuck in your career, you may be holding yourself back and may not even realize it. Prepare to be enlightened by the meaningful discussions here at the No Woman Left Behind podcast. Each week, gather the insight you need to break down those walls of limiting beliefs. Unleash your full potential and unlock the leader within. Listen to raw conversations with corporate women as they share inspiring stories with the purpose of obtaining their dream career and living a truly fulfilling life. Here's your host, Rosie Zelinskas.
Hey everyone, before we go into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that there is a free quiz that you can take on the nowomanleftbehind.com website. If you log on to the homepage and you scroll down just slightly, you're going to see a section that says, let's find out where you are in your career. If you click on the radio button that's called Take the Quiz, there will be a pop-up that comes up and it says, what's the key blocker in your career path? There are 3 key blockers that you may be operating under and you may not even know it. So if you click on just take the quiz, it's going to be about 10 questions. It really shouldn't take you more than 3 minutes. And then you're going to be able to get some additional resources just by taking the quiz. So remember, go to nowomanleftbehind.com to take the free quiz. Hey everyone, welcome back to the No Woman Left Behind podcast show. I'm Rosie Zelinskas, your podcast host. Today we're going to be talking to Sarah Kenny, and she is a certified teen life coach. We're going to talk about the building confidence and self-esteem for these young women at that age. We're also going to talk about some gender-specific challenges that these teen girls have, and more importantly, how can parents help and how they can become role models for both young women and young men, because we need to be able to change the system collectively. So let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. Sarah Kenny is a certified coach, mentor, and positive role model for adolescent girls. She believes empowering girls with confidence and courage will change the world for the better. And it's her personal mission to help girls thrive in adolescence and transform into powerful leaders, all while still supporting parents raising RAD girls. And RAD stands for Resilient, Audacious, and Daring. Sarah lives in Austin, Texas, and she has a master's degree in gender studies. She also has 2 professional coaching certifications and is an active member of the International Coaching Federation. So with that, stay tuned for my conversation with Sarah. Hey, Sarah, thank you for being here. So you have done a lot of work with the genders, growing up, as far as like how the opportunities young girls have versus young men. And I want to start talking to you about, it seems that one of the major things that I have noticed for women in the corporate world is the confidence piece. And we can talk about a confidence till we're blue in the face for women, but it actually starts when these young women are girls. So how do you help girls build their confidence and self-esteem from the time that they're young?
Yeah. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. And, having started off my career in the women's leadership space, so literally working with women leaders, and now I've kind of backtracked to working with, the pipeline, back to working with teens. And there is just, the confidence gap, we know that's a phenomenon. It's a phenomenal book. If you haven't read it,
yes.
There's a version for girls, but essentially, where I think part of the issue stems from is growing up, boys are rewarded for confidence, right? Taking big risks, being bold, allowing to fail, try again. And women and girls are socialized from a kind of people-pleasing and perfectionist angle that leaves very little room for failure. And so there's a great quote that's like, boys are raised to be confident and girls are raised to be competent.
Oh,
So girls vastly, and we see it in the statistics, they get better grades than boys. They obviously are graduating from university quicker than boys are, you know, men and boys. And yet when they get into the workplace, they are not rewarded for perfect work,
oh gosh.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's that. And so the confidence gap is really what starts in kind of middle school, frankly. And that's when we see confidence really start to drop off with girls. There's a lot going on there, right? Girls start to go through puberty, their bodies start to change. There's a lot that comes around kind of like objectification, right? They start to realize that they are being viewed sexually by other people. They then start to self-objectify. That's when we see confidence like whoop, really start to plummet. Tends to bottom out in 9th grade, and unfortunately does not get much higher from there.
Yeah.
And you see it, I'm sure, with women in the workplace. So again, like it starts young.
Right.
So where do we start to answer, like, how do we solve this?
Yeah,
right?
that's the biggest question is like, you know, so we obviously know the confidence gap, and there's a saying that telling isn't teaching. So the fact that we talk about it is step number one, right? You know, to have women become aware so that once they become moms, we don't keep repeating this over and over. And I think that's one of my biggest goals is to figure out what is the next step, Sarah.
Yes. So where things need to change, we need to start encouraging girls and rewarding girls for progress over perfection, right? Part of all of confidence building comes from having a growth mindset, right? Fixed mindset is like my abilities are like, I'm either good at math or I'm bad at math. And there's no room for improvement, versus a growth mindset means all of my skills and capabilities can be learned, can be improved with hard work, with studying, with all those things. And as this ties into confidence, building confidence is like building a muscle, right? If we really think of it like strength training.
Yes.
And it is a cycle. And there's a beautiful diagram. I actually show it to a lot of girls in the work that I do. But essentially, so if you think of confidence like a circle, we need to take action in order for us to actually develop the proof that we're competent, that we're capable, that we're resilient, that we can like mess up and try again, right? It has to be a cycle of action. And where a lot of girls tend to get stuck is, unless they feel like they're already good or perfect at something. So when it comes to the actual action cycle, we need to be encouraging girls that it's actually not about the outcome, because the outcome doesn't need to be perfect. It's about the progress. It's about taking action, learning. Did I like this? Did I not like this? What needs to be tweaked? You know, and even something like, you know, trying out for a play, or trying out for a soccer team, or, you know, applying to a reach school. All of those things are examples of taking action, learning from the outcomes of that so that you can continue to learn and grow and develop. And because of the perfectionism, we have like a lack of action cycle where girls are just not building confidence.
Right. Now, I want to go back to the example that you said, the fixed mindset is I'm not good at math or I'm good at math, whereas the growth mindset, and I just want to clarify this piece, is I'm not good at math right now, but with hard work, I can become good at math. And I think that's a distinction that we need to make there.
So one of the most powerful things that women and girls can do, and as your parent, when you're, you know, just listening to the language that your daughter is using, adding yet to the end of a sentence. I'm not good at math yet. I'm not good at tennis yet, right? That leaves room for, oh, but when I focus and I dedicate my time and my energy and practice, you start to actually improve those skills. So the power of yet add it to the end of sentences.
Yes. No, that makes a lot of sense. And you already talked a little bit about the perfectionism and the people pleasing, and that's something that's so ingrained. And a lot of times, so I just finished doing an 8-part episode negotiation series, and it was launched at the beginning of this year. And I think the people pleasing, a lot of times women don't negotiate or don't push back because they don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. They don't want to, make someone feel bad. But we need to be able to overcome that people pleasing. So what are some recommendations that you have then about how, especially young women that don't even want to make a phone call these days?
So, yes. So let me share an example. And this became abundantly clear to me right at the start of the pandemic. And, everything moved online, and it was a mess, right? Like, parents were trying to like homeschool, work from home. Kids are trying to figure out all these new online learning systems. Teachers are figuring out like, how do I set up this portal, right? I mean, there was a lot of confusion, understandably. So what I started noticing, there was this massive shift to online schooling. Girls started to get, and not just all students, not just girls, started to get very behind in their work, very overwhelmed by like, the thing I kept hearing over and over is, I actually don't even know what my assignments are, and I don't know where to find them. Like, there was mass confusion as to like, I think I have a math quiz later this week, but like, I don't even know where to go and how to find it. And so this kept coming up again and again in my sessions. And the girls I was working with were terrified of emailing their teachers to ask for clarification. And I kept on saying, I'm like, that's actually their job. Like, it's their job to teach you and help you. Like, they are getting paid. They are literally getting paid to teach you. And when you unraveled that more and more, what was so mind-blowing was what actually was underneath that. They were so afraid that asking the teacher a question, because they were confused, it would be indicating to the teacher, or would be sending the teacher a message that they think they're a bad teacher.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't want to hurt their teacher's feelings by asking a question.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say I thought you were going to say that the young girl was thinking the teacher was thinking that they were not, doing a good job or keeping track or whatever.
Well, and I'm sure there was some of that for sure, like the fear of like exposing, like, oh gosh, but they must think I'm a bad student. I'm sure they're like, I think that's definitely a layer as well. But and so in a lot of the sessions for me, it was really kind of breaking down, like having to really kind of explain to them, like, everyone's super confused right now. Like, this is your teacher's job. It's okay. Like, so that then comes down to like the learning how to self-advocate. So, and this is a perfect example too, right? You're in the workplace. You don't learn how to self-advocate at a young age. You get to the workplace, you're assigned a project. You're too embarrassed to ask questions. You're set up for failure from the second you're handed a portfolio or a paper or project, right? And so I think when it comes to, especially for girls, there's a few layers too. And you already mentioned this. So there's also this belief that like, not only are we responsible for other people's feelings, right? So we don't want to hurt anyone else's feelings. So we don't want to ask for a raise, or we don't want to, but also underneath that is a belief of like, am I deserving of asking for help?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah.
Right. Because women and girls are socialized to believe that everyone's needs are more important than our own. We're the caretakers. We put everybody else first. And so then there's a whole other layer of, it's okay that you have needs. So first of all, we acknowledge that we have needs. It's okay that we are allowed to have them met. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is actually developing the skill and the confidence to actually be able to ask for help and to self-advocate.
Yeah, I that's so important. The okay to ask for help is huge. And then asking questions. I actually had read a study, to kind of go back to the confidence peaking. I had read a study that girls' confidence peaks at age 9, which is even worse, than what you had mentioned. And also that college age girls, when they're in a lecture setting, they're 2.5 times less likely to ask questions than the male counterparts. And it was things going through their head like, are they going to think I'm dumb? Does the teacher, I don't want them to think that I really don't understand when they didn't understand. And like the focus on themselves and the feeling of not wanting for other people to think that they were less than.
Yes. Yes. And so much of the work that I do with girls is around just the fear of judgment, right? Like, what are other people going to think of me? And of course, like, this affects all of us. I'm not saying boys don't experience this too, but the fear of judgment, and also the fear of, in that specific instance, there's the fear of judgment, but also the fear of actually like being seen as smart. And like girls who do know the answers to the questions are also hesitant to raise their hand because they're like, well, I don't want people to think I'm being a smarty pants. I don't want people to think I'm all that. It's like it's like this double bind that like
yeah. Holy cow. So obviously you said earlier that we are raised differently, boys versus girls. So I know you have some gender specific challenges that teens face, today. And the biggest thing that I want you to answer is, how can parents help them navigate? Now, mind you, this is knowing that, so my kids are now 22 and 24. When they were teenagers, they didn't want to tell me anything. They didn't want to share anything with me. So as a parent, it is so difficult to, even if you tell them, you can tell me anything a million times, at the end of the day. And now that they're in their 20s, they're like, oh yeah, we used to do this. Oh yeah.
Totally. Okay. So like, that's literally the reason I have a job. It is absolutely common, natural, as part of like the adolescent process. Is you can have the closest relationship with your child. You could still have a very healthy relationship. And they, as a part of their growing up and kind of like the becoming independent and creating their own identity, means actually physically and emotionally separating from their parent, from you. And so, of course, even if you're super close, they don't want to tell their parents everything. So here's where, so I know, and it's so funny because when I do a lot of parent education as well. And, they're like, well, even if I say this, like, they just roll their eyes, they, just shut it down, pretend like they don't know. They still hear it.
Okay.
Whether they are responding and acknowledging is a whole other story. But the more you are educating, pushing those messages, they may roll their eyes, like, oh, yeah, mom, I get it, right? Whatever the response is, but like the message is coming from somewhere. And so I would say when it comes to parent education, there are some great things to be doing. So one is, I'm a very firm believer in just handing your child resources in a very kind of nonchalant way of like, hey, I came across this article, or I heard this podcast, or I heard this interesting conversation, overheard this conversation at Starbucks the other day. And just, whether that's like leaving a printout on their bed and being like, with a Post-it, thought this was interesting. Like, just, it is providing information from them, but you're not like forcing them to read it and do it in front of you. It's more of just like, hey, I thought these resources, right? There's great websites for teens. I am constantly sending girls to Planned Parenthood's website when it comes to how conversations about how to tell your parents that you're questioning your gender, or right, how to have conversations around safe sex, all that different stuff. And so, and I think what's really important, and this is a huge gap, frankly, in the coaching industry, even in the work that I'm doing, and this obviously from the way that corporations and frankly, the way the world is structured is we cannot achieve gender parity and gender equality without male allies and without the systems actually changing.
Absolutely.
And so if you are raising a boy, I would say we have a lot of work to do on educating boys about gender dynamics, misogyny, the patriarchy, gender inequity, right? Like we could have those conversations all day with girls. That's still not changing the system within which we're operating.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And so I think, I push this like in my own home. I push this basically within, I have this conversation all the time with friends of mine who have, sons and daughters. Make sure you are role modeling in your home the dynamics that you want to be seeing, right? If your son only sees you cleaning and goes off to college, never learning how to do laundry, how to make a grocery list, right? Like then he's going to get in. So it's both sides. It's both sides.
Yeah. That's so interesting because again, my kids now being in their 20s, you're absolutely right, because now sometimes when I have conversations, my daughter's like, oh, Mom, I hear your voice in my head. Or my son, who's 24, he's like, yeah, he folds the towels the way I fold the towels. He's very clean. He like does, laundry and dishes and stuff like that. And when they were growing up, I was a single mom. So when they were every other weekend, when they were with their kids or with their dad, I would clean. But when they were with me on the weekends, the three of us would clean. It would take us like 2 or 3 hours to clean our entire house. I would give them their list and they each had their chores. And then at the end of the evening, we hung out, we had a movie or whatever, and the house was clean. So, but it was always like, we're a team and the three of us are going to clean together. And my daughter says sometimes that's like some of the best memories that she has, because we were together and we were doing things and we were accomplishing things. And interestingly enough, when she became a teenager, her room was never clean. And now that she has her own place, now she cleans up.
Totally.
But I do see what you're saying as far as when Bobby was in high school, I always made sure to tell him, you need to respect women. You need to make sure that you treat them with kindness. And I always told my kids, if I ever catch you bullying someone, oh, you're going to get it, because there is no bullying. So you're absolutely right that a lot of that comes from the parents and we have to model it. So what are some things that you recommend then to your friends when they have sons? Like, how do we make them allies? And then the bigger question is, how do we start changing the system?
Oh, I wish that was an easy answer. Right? Before I answer that, there were two things that popped into my mind as you were sharing that tidbit about your children. So just two extra tips for parents. Best time to be having conversations in the car. Not required to make eye contact. It is a time bound, like, okay, within 5 minutes, this conversation is over. They know they can get out of the car. And even if it's just like, so here's a perfect example, right? That study came out from the CDC, I think maybe like 10 days, 2 weeks ago, about teen mental health. Okay. And just the alarming statistics we are seeing around anxiety, depression, self-harm, eating disorders, all of that. Yeah. Parents are deeply alarmed about that, understandably. Like I saw that as a coach and just went like, oh, like this is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. That is a perfect example. You may not want to be, your child may not be receptive to having that conversation with you immediately. You raise it like this, say, hey, it's been all over the news. It was on CNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, and it was everywhere 2 weeks ago. Say, hey, there's been a lot in the news recently about this study. I'm really curious, like, do you see this happening with your friends? Like, do you think a lot of kids at school are lonely, right? Like make it about other people, not them. And that's kind of just like an inroad into like what's happening in their world without being like, I'm worried that you're depressed. Like, tell me how you're doing. Right? Because then you get the shutdown. And then the other piece is, you mentioned your movie night. I think like documentaries, movies are a great door to open that conversation. So if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, great
Yeah.
example. I made that a movie night in my home,
Mhm.
where it was like we were watching this together and we were having a conversation about technology use, our addiction to social media. Like, so those are also avenues where it's like maybe you're a little uncomfortable about like your kid kind of not wanting the information from you, but those are great ways to be giving like the information you want them to have, but where it's not coming down from the parent. So
Right.
just wanted to revisit that real quick.
Yes, no, those are fantastic, suggestions
Yeah.
for sure. So, okay, sounds good. So now
Okay.
the bigger question.
The bigger question. So I think if you are raising a boy, the best things that we can be doing, we need to be talking about, just like the objectification of women, how women are sexualized, how boys are talking about girls at school, right? Like the way they just talk about their body, like make really awful, crude comments. And it may not even be when the girls are around, but
Mhm.
it could be, right? Like the guys just being guys and hanging out. Like those are opportunities to educate your son to say, like, look, this is how, like, this is how we live in a rape culture. This is why we live in a culture that accepts, just considers it standard that it's okay to sexually and physically abuse women. Like this is where that starts. And so having conversations about pornography, right? I know that is like horrifying and just mortifying for most parents. There's actually some really good podcasts about this, but oh my gosh, I don't want to misquote the statistic, but I think it's safe to say that over half of 12-year-olds at this point have seen online pornography.
Oh, wow.
And if you can only imagine like how violent, degrading, and that is educating how kids are now having sex, how what boys are expecting from girls, how girls are expecting to perform. They are so deeply uncomfortable. And these are conversations we have to be having about respecting women and not even just being kind, but also like educate, like when they're in a group of their guy friends, having the courage to say, hey, it's really not cool that we're talking about, summer like that. That's not cool. Like that starts with the guys. And I think, maybe that needs to be coming down from the husband, right? Like that
Right.
that needs to be like men need to be having these conversations.
Right.
So that's I think, and so here another thing, one of my girlfriends, and I think it's beautiful that she's doing this. Um, she is educating her son about girls' periods and saying, look, like the girls you are going to school with are dealing with this, like they don't feel well, they're physically in pain, like they're cranky, right? Like all of these things where it's like, boys make jokes of like, oh, she must be PMSing because she's,
Right.
quote unquote, capital B. And it's like, so she's like, no, I'm being really serious about educating my son of like half the women in your life are dealing with this literally
Yeah.
once a month.
Absolutely. No, that's great. So kind of back to the girls, what are some life skills that you think are important for us to develop girls so that they know that there's better ways of them thinking about themselves and then acting in the world?
Yes. Okay. I think the top two that come to mind are, and this is all part of like building self-esteem and building self-confidence, but is being able to validate yourself.
Mm.
So internal validation, right? And of course, social media has made this just turn this, like put it on steroids, but we are constantly seeking external validation to feel good about ourselves, whether that's praise from your boss, whether that's a compliment from a boyfriend, but we need to be able to do that for ourselves, regardless of all the other noise because we are living in a world, right, that is constantly telling women and girls, stay small, stay quiet, stay physically small, right? Like do not take up a lot of space
Yes.
and stay quiet. And so being able to make ourselves feel good without needing to get on Instagram, right? Without like seeking attention from other people. So the ability to self-validate like will serve you your entire lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to self-advocate. We talked about this earlier, but really being able to say, like, I have needs and I need help getting them taken care of, whether that means like saying, you know, for girls, this is so hard. They're so tired after the school week, you know, they play sports, they're in all these clubs. They legitimately just want to stay home on a Friday night.
Yes.
They know it's better for their mind, their body, their spirit, if they could just get some sleep, have a relaxing weekend. But then they don't want to miss out on party, right? They're like, oh, but so there's like FOMO, and all of that is totally real. Social media makes it worse. But then they start running themselves into the ground because they're not taking care of themselves.
Right.
So being able to self-advocate and say, you know what, I would love to go tonight, but I think I'm actually going to feel a lot better if I just stay in and have a movie night. Right. And like most adults don't know how to do this. Right? Talk about self-care and protecting your boundaries, like that, just that ability to say, like, this is what I need. And I'm going to voice that because like I deserve to take care of myself.
Right.
I think everybody needs to learn this skill, but especially because girls tend to feel like they're not allowed to do that, and they're not supposed to do that. That feels really challenging. And I think when it comes to the people pleasing thing, we have got to be, and everybody, like of all genders, it does not matter, from a very early age needs to learn, like, we are not responsible for other people's feelings.
Yeah.
The emotional burden that girls take on for how other people feel. I mean, I'm not kidding. I have had multiple clients who know they're in relationships that they're unhappy. They know that even like one of them was like borderline, like emotionally abusive, like knowing like this is not a good relationship for me to be in. And so afraid to break up with their, and this is in high school, right? So afraid to break up with their boyfriend because they don't want to hurt his feelings. And this happens, right? You get it. Like this happens in all of our relationships, but like, you're not responsible for your parents' feelings. You're not responsible for your siblings' feelings. Like it's on all of us to manage our own emotions, regulate our own emotions, and also not constantly feel responsible for how their teacher is feeling, right? How their boyfriend is feeling, how their parents are feeling. And that is another skill that I spend a lot of time working with girls on. And I think all of that ties together, right? Because you're not going to self-advocate if you're afraid of hurting your friend's feelings, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to say no to that party because I don't want her to feel bad.
Right.
And they go to the party and then they feel bad.
Right. Well, I think that's huge because as an adult, especially when you're, trying to be in a relationship, the biggest thing is you can't make people happy. Like you have to be happy yourself. And I think, especially women, once you start working on that self-confidence and taking care of yourself, and once you get to a place that you're happy with who you are, and the biggest thing is loving yourself, right? Loving yourself, because if you don't love yourself, how can you expect anybody else to love you? And then once all those pieces fall into place, then that's when you start attracting people.
Yes.
But that's really hard for a teenager, both, male and female, to understand that, because it's such a journey. It's like there's adults that still don't love themselves.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And you just reminded me of another one. I'm gonna throw one more in there. And again, I think this goes for adults even, is learning how to be alone.
Yeah.
And I don't mean lonely, but I mean alone. Can you spend time with yourself without immediately going on your phone, immediately going on Netflix, immediately getting on Amazon, immediately online shopping? Like most people at this point, I think a lot of it does have to do with, social media and technology. Like we cannot be alone with ourselves. But what ends up happening is we're constantly seeking things outside of ourselves to feel good. And so I know a lot of girls who they don't know how to be by themselves. And then they're making decisions, right, that ultimately don't feel good. They don't know how to be alone, but they know they're too tired to go to a party. So they go to a party because it feels too uncomfortable to stay home by themselves. But that's where we get to know ourselves. That's where we get to meet ourselves. Like that's where we, that's where we learn about ourselves. And then, right, as you get into being an adult, then when it comes to the relationship component, there will always be nights when everybody else is busy. There will always be nights when someone doesn't respond to a text message, when like we're left out, when we're not invited to a wedding, right? Like whatever it may be.
Right.
How can we be with ourselves? And so much of that then is like where like the self-love and the self-validation comes in. But if we don't even give ourselves the headspace to be alone, we never get to meet ourselves is really what it comes down to.
Oh gosh, yes. I love that you just said we never get to meet ourselves. And that's pretty crucial for teenage girls too. And I think what I love about a conversation that we're having today and the work that you do is that awareness is the first step, right? Like, again, telling isn't teaching, but at least now that we are trying to make these young teenage women aware that these are possibilities that they can explore, that makes such a huge difference. Because when I was growing up, I'm going to be 54 soon. So when I was in high school, it was 83 to 87. There was nothing like this back then. There was no coaching. There was no like, where can I get information? We didn't even know what self-confidence was at the time.
Right.
So now at least I feel that from all the conversations that are being had in the world, and I think we're in a beautiful place for women that so many of us are collectively pushing, towards the same goal. And that's when I think things are going to start changing. And I absolutely love the work that you do. And so I want to ask you, so obviously you live in Austin and you have a master's degree in gender studies. So tell me a little bit about your story now, about how you happen to go into gender studies and how did you end up doing the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. So, it's one of those things. And I think Glennon Doyle, I think I think it's her quote, but she says like, follow the flicker. It's like, what are the things as you were little that like, like the things that really piqued your interest, the things you were kind of like weirdly obsessed with, the things and looking back for me, that was always something very feminist. Like as a child, I was obsessed with the Salem witch trials. It's like all I have no idea why. I wrote all of my book reports on like Joan of Arc and like right. So like, needless to say, fast forward, like you kind of have all these things as a kid that was just like, I think it's just part of my DNA. It was like, whether we just born naturally a feminist, I grew up, in a household where my parents were actually like very progressive, very kind of, equal in terms of, like how household stuff. Anyway, fast forward, and it just ended up happening that, I get to college and, at the time it was called women's studies. So even so much has changed between when I was in, college and kind of where the gender studies field is now. And it was just one of those things where I took a women's studies course and I was like, this is it. I mean, this is just so fascinating. And so, that was the track that I wanted to be on in terms, it was just so interesting to me. And frankly, also just realizing like, I don't like the way the world operates. Like, I don't like the state of affairs right now. And that was the case in the 90s and early 2000s, and probably even more so today,
Yes,
unfortunately.
Yes.
And so, as soon as I graduated with my master's in gender studies, I had been in DC. I moved back to DC, and that's where I got really involved in the women's leadership space. So I was doing a lot around women's political participation, doing a lot of I was doing democracy building, conflict resolution, but specifically focusing on training women leaders to become kind of better advocates, better, whether that's within grassroots organizations or like getting into the political system. And that process, as much as I loved it, and that work to this day still it holds a very special place in my heart. I actually realized through that work, I love working at the individual level, the one-on-one, the seeing the transformation, the kind of, I'm a very like heart-centered person. So just the actual like one-on-one connection versus doing all of this like massive policy work where you don't really see the results right away. And so the mission felt important, but I felt like I wasn't getting the satisfaction from the amount of work that was being put in. And so, fast forward again, discover coaching, and I was like, holy cow, I want to be a coach. This is it. And then you already just mentioned this earlier. I went through such radical transformation as a result of going through my coaching program. And one of the first things I thought was, why didn't I have this when I was a kid? Why didn't I have this when I was a teen? I was miserable as a teenager, right? Struggled with crippling perfectionism, people pleasing, anxiety. I mean, like trying to get into the best colleges and being, I was a really competitive athlete. I mean, all of the just like the pressure cooker that girls are living in. And, I think so for me, it's like the gender lens has always been there. And then realizing, hey, wait, if someone had taught me at 14 about emotional regulation and communicating my needs and setting boundaries and setting goals that like actually were for me rather than for other people, right? Like, so that was the light bulb moment. And it was just like, girls need this so badly. And it's desperately the work that I love doing.
Gosh, well, I am so glad that you had that transformation, because obviously that has led you to coaching. And what you just said reminded me, and I have to do a shout out to my niece, Allie. So she's 17. She's getting ready to go to college, and she got a result from a college that she really wanted to go to, and she didn't get in. But we were all kind of like, oh my gosh. And she sent her mom, or I think she put a social media post saying, I didn't get in, but that's okay. I know that I'm secure in what I'm doing. She wants to go into the arts. And so she processed that so quickly and so beautifully. And she actually said, I don't need validation from the outside. And I was like, oh, thank goodness.
Amen.
Amen, Allie. So yes. I think to your point, going back towards the beginning where you were saying parents can leave little articles or send a podcast or lead by example, you're right, because our young people are listening and they are internalizing the information, even though they may not want to admit it. They do listen to the conversations that you're having. So it is crucially important for moms specifically to teach these things to our young daughter so that they are better prepared. And the confidence is always going to be, you can't teach someone confidence, but you can show them actions to become more confident. And then the confidence just comes with age. It just comes with age.
And I tell girls this all the time. I'm like, look, like I can guarantee you, because I'm about to be 40, and I will say, I'm like, this is the happiest I've ever been, the healthiest I've ever been. And the older you get, you care less and less and less Absolutely. What other people think.
Yes.
And it's beautiful.
I heard Oprah, she was interviewing Marianne Williamson, who Marianne Williamson just announced her presidency run again.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Marianne and Oprah were talking, and Oprah was like, ladies, if you think you're having fun in your 30s or in your 40s,
wait for it.
Your 50s and 60s, because when you're in your 50s, you now have money, you know what you want, you know what you don't want, and you don't sit around waiting for your spouse to give you permission to do, or boyfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whatever, to do XYZ. You go and do it. And you're confident. And then women that are in their 80s, they say whatever they want and they apologize. So I think it's just such a beautiful evolution of a woman's growth over her life. And this is why we're having these conversations, because we want our younger women to know and realize that there are options, that there are ways for them to get information. And, the internet is good and bad, depending on how you use it. But there are so many resources, and the work that you're doing is just so, so important.
Thank you. Well, and you also bring up such an important point, which is even if that information is not coming from you as a parent, right? Depending on however your relationship is, role models matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So whether that is hiring a coach or, whether that's her, her soccer coach or her lacrosse coach or swim coach or, someone who she admires, who's older, who she looks up to, maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's a cousin, whoever, surrounding her with people. Cause I think it is, and it's, and there is psychology behind this but when you are in your adolescence, everything feels like there's this very limiting belief that like life is always going to look this way.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening right now is actually how everything is going to look. And I think there's something super beautiful about, even if girls don't want to hear it from their parents, being reminded things get better. This is one of the hardest, like literally the hardest periods of your life. Adolescence is rocky, right? And I heard a therapist say the other day, this is the hardest time probably that we've ever known. It is the hardest time to be a teenager.
Yeah.
It is the hardest time to raise a teenager.
Yeah. So
we are living in the wild, wild west of technology and social media and stuff that just feels like so wildly out of our control. And it's like, but the reminders of it gets better, like you may not get into your top school, but you will go to a school and you'll learn something about yourself. And every person you meet there will just be another thread in your life that, right? Like it's all, and the reminder that, and I think this is like something that causes a lot of the anxiety that teens feel is like, there are no dead ends. Like everything is a detour.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is a detour. We may think like this is the end of the road. It's like, nope, we're taking a hard right.
Absolutely.
And and whether that comes in terms of doing a major career transition, that's at every stage of our life.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, Sarah, oh my gosh, this conversation is one of the best conversations I've had when it comes to young women, because again, your work is so critically important. And I would like to ask you, do you have 2 actionable concrete tips that young women can use to get better, just dealing with their lives right now?
Yes. One, I am a big, big pusher on this, and I will be on my soapbox forever. It is so important that girls develop mindfulness skills, that all of us, every human develops more mindfulness. I cannot tell you, like, meditation has changed my life. I am someone who used to experience, crippling levels of anxiety. I developed a very solid meditation practice throughout the pandemic. And I can tell you now, like, I know when I miss a day. When it comes to learning to meet yourself, learning how to manage stress, learning how to manage anxiety, like YouTube has thousands of free, and they're for teens and they're for kids, right? Like you can literally search based on like, I want one for sleep, or I want one for like before I need to study, right? Like developing that skill early. So I'm like, mindfulness. I will push that as hard as I can. And the other thing I would recommend girls start doing is, and I have one right next to my bed, we need to be giving ourselves compliments every single day. Oh. So it's called a did wells journal. So what did I do well today? And at the end of the day, you write down 3 things that you think did really well. You did really well. Has nothing to do with other people. It's like, and so it could be so small. It's like, I saw a kid at lunch looked really lonely. And so I scooched down at the table and created whatever it is, right? Like things that I cleaned up my room without my mom nagging me. Like, yes. One day the dads will be nagging, right?
How would I actually put the dishes in the dishwasher?
Yeah. Or like, it could be something as simple as like, I washed my face today.
I was just going to say,
I
it could be as simple as I actually took care of my skincare, like taking off the makeup, because so many of us, I mean, I'm pretty good at taking off my makeup all the time, but there's a routine and there's like a ritual that you go through, but taking off all that chemicals from your face is just so important. So yes, washing your face is one.
No, I saw, or like, I sat down and studied for a test when I really didn't feel like it.
I love
But
it.
so, and that is a way to build confidence, is it constantly acknowledging the stuff that we think we're doing well. Keep it next to your bed, 3 things or maybe it's like middle of the day, whatever your system needs to be. But that's how we learn to self-validate.
Wonderful. Well, Sarah, so tell me a little bit about how young girls can find you, because I think this is very important for you to tell them how they can find you.
Yes. So I would say follow me on Instagram. I post multiple times a week, leadership tips, a lot around stress and anxiety management, largely because that's those are for me. So whatever I am up to, I am sharing that with other people. So follow me on Instagram, and trust me, I have a lot of feelings around social media and boundaries and all of that. And it's a tool that I'm using to educate people. So I would say find me there. And then for parents, I would say join my first of all, follow me on Instagram. It's for everybody. And then also sign up for my newsletter. So I have a bi-monthly newsletter for parents with just tips, tools, articles, information to be sharing with your daughters and with your kids.
Oh my gosh, that is fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for the wonderful conversation. And I want to leave you any final words on anything that you want to leave the audience with.
You mentioned, you asked us earlier, how do we fix this? It feels so big, right? And there are days where I'm like, why are any of us doing this work? It feels so hard. It feels so challenging, like whether you're in the corporate space or the life coaching space or whatever. It starts small and it starts in the home.
Yeah.
And so it is like, if it's a small thing that you can do within your house or within your community or within your church or within your school, right? It doesn't need to, like, we're not like, if I think every day about like changing the world, like I almost can't get out of bed.
Right. Yes. It's overwhelming.
But if I think I can have one small impact today on a client or doing something like this on a podcast, so even if that's like with your kids at home or, at your job, like start small, and it's just like one thing a day, and we start there.
Perfect. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you again for being on the podcast show. And this was a fantastic conversation.
Rosie, thank you so much. It's been so fun to be here.
All right. Thanks. Sarah Kenny is an incredible teen life coach. I would highly recommend any parents that are having any kinds of struggles with your teenagers to reach out to Sarah, because it is so critically important for us as parents to be able to get through our teens. And sometimes, unfortunately, and I say this from experience, teens don't want to talk to their parents. They don't want to open up to their parents. But if you have a third party, whether it's a counselor, a therapist, or a life coach like Sarah, there's a chance for you to be able to figure out how to help your teen. So highly recommend for you to contact Sarah. All of Sarah's contact information will be linked to the episode website, so you can certainly find her there. And she is on Instagram, LinkedIn, and her website is sarahkennycoaching.com. Again, all of that will be linked. Sarah left us with 2 great tips. Tip number 1, she said, develop mindfulness skills. And that's really important because, as she said, meditation changed her life. Meditation is one of those things that people believe is hard, but it just takes practice like anything else. I'm also going to link a website that I use. It's actually an affiliate link for me, and it's called Positive Prime. And that is meditation without meditation. So Positive Prime is based on neuroscience, and it's a series of beautiful pictures. And if you watch them for 3 minutes a day, it impacts your brain positively for the next 6 to 8 hours. It does the same thing as meditating without having to sit there and try to quote unquote clear your mind. So I will link that in the show notes as well. Tip number 2, she says, do a did well journal. So at the end of the day, have a journal by your bed and write down 3 things that you did well. And like we said, it could be washing your face, putting a dish in the dishwasher, doing your homework when you didn't want to, things like that. But it's very important for us to acknowledge the things that we have done well throughout the day. So those are 2 great tips that Sarah provided us. So again, great conversation. I am hoping that this reaches teens out there in the world so that they can realize and understand that there are optional things that you can do when you're feeling that stress and that anxiety, and things will get better as you get older. But for today, mindfulness and journaling are great tips. So with that, I want you to remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let these stories of self-encouragement and professional development serve as a guide in navigating through corporate America in the most practical and fulfilling way possible. Do not forget to subscribe to the show at nowomanleftbehind.com for more content like this. Leave a rating and share it with your friends, because we want to make sure that no woman is left behind. Until I see you next time, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.